Welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to have you all with us tonight. I am Janice Kaminer-Resnick. We appreciate you being with us for our 52nd consecutive week of America at a Crossroads programming. Tonight, we are celebrating our one-year anniversary for this America at a Crossroads series, which is a joint venture of Jews United for Democracy and Justice and Community Advocates, Inc. Our leadership team includes Zev Yaroslavsky, Mel Levine, Rabbi Ken Chazen, Caroline Kelly, David Lehrer, and myself. Thank you to our many wonderful co-sponsors. Their names were posted before the program began. In recognition of our one-year anniversary, our executive team members will be joining me in a moment for a few short comments. It has been a great honor to work with Zev, Mel, and David literally on a daily basis over this past year to bring these programs to you. I also want to thank you, our loyal audience. You have consistently shown up, and many of you have made donations to help offset the costs of this series. We are so appreciative. To ensure that we can all watch President Biden's address to the joint session of Congress tonight, we will be ending our program a few minutes early, so don't worry about missing the end of tonight's program or the beginning of President Biden's address. It's been an amazing year. Now I would like to welcome my colleagues, former Congressman Mel Levine, great LA leader and political civic leader, Zev Yaroslavsky, and David Lehrer. I'm going to hand it off to you, Mel.
Thanks, Janice. I echo your how enjoyable it's been to work with the three of you. Working closely with Janice, Zev, and David on this has been a real pleasure. Jews United for Democracy and Justice was formed early in Trump's presidency because we felt a Los Angeles Jewish voice was needed to oppose Trump's severe assaults on civil rights and civil liberties. When COVID hit, we decided to try to provide virtual access to thoughtful voices of political and opinion leaders. And we've been overwhelmed and thrilled to have been able to present over 100 superb speakers during this past year, who have regularly given our audiences thoughtful and provocative ideas and insights. From Doris Kearns Goodwin to Fareed Zakaria to Leon Panetta, Henry Waxman, and Adam Schiff to George Will, Max Boot, Tom Friedman, and Jennifer Rubin, and some 90 others, the messages have been riveting, none more so than the sobering message delivered by Rick Hazen and Larry Diamond last week about the imminent threat that threatens our democracy. And in the tradition of these excellent speakers, I'm very happy to welcome and introduce Congresswoman Judy Chu. I met Judy through our mutual close friend, John Chung, a number of years ago, and I have greatly admired Judy for many years. She has served in Congress for 12 years, representing a district which includes Monterey Park, San Gabriel, San Marino, and other areas near those. This is after an impressive career as three-term mayor of Monterey Park and 8 years in the California Assembly. She happens to be the first Chinese American woman elected to Congress. She is highly respected, substantive, and smart. And as a result of these talents, she has become the chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific Caucus, a critically important voice at a critical time when such leadership is essential. But before calling on Judy, I lateral it to Zev.
Thank you, Mel. And thank you, David and Janice, and all the people who have worked with us to make this a successful series over the last year. And thank you so much to our audience. You've been loyal, intelligent, and engaging. One of the things that has been critical to the success of this program is our moderators, and I do want to call them out and thank them. First of all, tonight's moderator, moderator extraordinaire, Warren Olney, who I've known for many, many years. Pat Morrison of the Los Angeles Times, Madeline Brand of KCRW, as well as Henry Weinstein of UC Irvine, who has moderated several of our critical interviews, and Pam Fessler of NPR, National Public Radio. We thank them, and Larry Mantle, Larry Mantle of KPCC Radio here in Los Angeles. All of them have done such an outstanding job, and I can tell you from personal experience, it is difficult to be a good moderator, and they've all been excellent. It's my pleasure to introduce, with the delayed reaction, Stewart Kwoh, who's our other guest tonight with Judy Chu. Stewart is someone I've known for many years, very active in our community and on a whole host of issues, one of the most respected and accomplished advocates for social justice anywhere. He founded the Advancing Justice Program, a Los Angeles leadership program in interethnic relations, which has trained over 1,000 community leaders in collaboration with African American, Latino, Asian Pacific, and LGBTQ communities. His numerous awards for public service include a Genius Grant from the MacArthur Foundation. He was the first Asian American attorney and human rights advocate to receive the Genius Award. We're privileged to have both Judy and Stewart here tonight. Now let me turn it over to the other engine of this enterprise, David Lehrer.
Thank you, Zev. Thank you, Janice. Thank you, Mel, for your participation, partnership in making this series possible. It's been a labor of love on all of our parts. I echo what you three have said before me and add how satisfying it has been to be a part of a program that has engaged thousands of people every week from across the country and literally around the world. We now average nearly 5,000 registrants a week, with almost as many actually watching live. And as you can see from the graph, the growth has been slow and steady, even after the elections, after January 6th, and after the inauguration. We are serving a need and an interest that is clearly out there. Your emails and notes give us endless pleasure as they describe the support and illumination these programs provided during a trying year. And the thank yous we get from our speakers are also exceptionally gratifying. When Brett Stevens, David Brooks, Max Boot, Bill Crystal, and Professor Larry Diamond tell us about how civil, how engaging, how passionate, how thoughtful, and how rare our programs are, it means a lot. One of our guests believes that we have created a community, a winning formula. Thank you to all our panelists, to you, our audience, and to our incredible moderators. As David Brooks wrote us, your secret is the outstanding journalists who serve as moderators. Tonight, we have our most frequent moderator and an award-winning and truly outstanding journalist, Warren Olney, helming the program. And now it's Warren's turn to take over and lead us through this very fascinating topic. Warren?
Thank you, David. Thank you for those kind words. It has been both a privilege and a pleasure as well to have played such a role in America at a Crossroads. Great title for a very important moment in history, I think. And tonight's topic is not just timely, but I think it's also very appropriate to the ideas and values of those who are sponsoring organizations and the individuals behind them, some of whom we've already heard from. So thank you very much for letting me be a part of this, and I'm just delighted to be here. Let me tell the audience that you won't be forgotten. I'll be getting text messages with your questions on them, and in about a half hour, I'll get to those and ask them. I just want to make one thing absolutely clear. We are going to close in time for the president's address to Congress. What time exactly do you want me to be off? Can you tell me that?
5:50.
5:50. Okay, thank you very much. I had it wrong, and I'm glad I asked. Sorry to break it up. The timing of this obviously is very important. Just last week, the U.S. Senate passed what's called the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. The vote was 94-1. Josh Hawley, the Republican from Missouri, being the dissenter. It is now pending in the House. As a result of anti-Asian sentiment and violence in recent months. But of course, there is nothing new about that in American history. The Chinese Exclusion Act passed in 1882. It wasn't repealed or taken off the books until 1943. And by that time, Japanese Americans were being interned around the country in the course of World War II. Before and since that act was on the books, there have been horrendous acts of violence and brutal discrimination against Asians in this country. So I do want to start, because of the act that passed and is now pending in the House, with Congresswoman Chu. Thank you so much for being with us. And let me tell you, first of all, what does the act do first, and what are the chances of it passing in Congress?
The fact that the Senate bill passed with a vote of 94-1 was very unusual, but really tremendous. It was a great step forward. because, as you know, there aren't too many bills that are actually getting across the finish line over in the Senate. But the fact that it started in the Senate, got that vote, means that it will go to the House. Of course, it will pass out of the House, and it will be signed into law by President Biden. The bill actually is a combination of two bills. One is the original COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which designates somebody in the Department of Justice to expedite hate crime prosecutions, and also provides guidance to law enforcement on how to report hate crimes and on culturally appropriate ways to reach out to the community. But it's also containing the totality of the bill that I'm a co-lead of, which is called the No Hate Act. And the No Hate Act takes great steps to improve our flawed hate crimes reporting and enforcement system. In 1990, there was a federal law passing that the FBI was supposed to collect hate crime statistics, but it failed at doing so because they could only rely on voluntary input from local law enforcement. Well, of the 15,000 local law enforcement agencies out there, only 15% report anything. So we have a failed system right now. And what this bill does is improve the hate crime reporting so that it is actually consistent and detailed. It also provides grants to law enforcement agencies to get a hate crime unit in place and also have training. It provides for state-run hate crime hotlines so that victims can report and also get some help. And it provides for oversight, where the U.S. Attorney General will give Congress a yearly report on what the status of hate crime enforcement is in the United States.
What's the significance of reporting? To whom are the reports given, and are there expected to be consequences?
There should be some way of combining all the reports that are there. That's what this original law in 1990 was supposed to do. All these reports were supposed to go to the FBI, which would tabulate it. But the data is very flawed. It is very flimsy. There is tremendous underreporting. 3 states don't even have a hate crime statute. 18 states don't even have any kind of mandate to report. And of course, there is so little training that the degree to which law enforcement actually takes it seriously varies from location to location. And so there has to be that consistent training. Let me give an example. If a local law enforcement officer goes to a building and sees a swastika on it, do they report it as a hate crime or do they report it as vandalism? Well, you can see if you don't have the training, then you might report it as vandalism.
And the reporting, once again, is that designed to lead to more enforcement? Is it designed to change policy? What are the consequences of the reporting? What's the need for it?
Well, first of all, we need to know what's really going on in our country. Right now, there's such vast underreporting that the National Victimization Survey says we should actually have about 250,000 hate crimes around the nation, but only 2.4% are actually reported. Shouldn't we have a better picture of what's going on in the United States? We need to see where this is happening, how this is happening, to whom this is happening. Now, because there is such a failure in our national database, when all these hate crimes started occurring against AAPIs starting in the beginning of last year, we had to create our own. Actually, there's a hate crime reporting site called Stop AAPI Hate. And so they just, on their own, with their own money, they did it. And they were able to get 3,800 reported hate crimes and incidents. It's probably really the tip of the iceberg. But otherwise, there would have been no way for us to report.
Stewart Kwoh, let me turn to you. You recently authored or co-authored in the Los Angeles Times an article with Connie Chung-Jo and Connie Rice about the hate crimes bill. And one of the questions you asked in it very prominently is, but will it make us safer? Answer that question, if you will. Will it or not?
Well, we think that it's part of the answer. We think we did say we celebrate the passage of the Senate bill and we look forward to the House bill. But we feel that the violence is so widespread and the hate incidents and the hate crimes are so widespread. We have to also figure out how do we prevent these crimes and incidents from occurring in the first place. It's great to track, but that's after the fact. So how do we prevent these crimes and these incidents from taking place? And I know Judy supports our efforts as well. So we need both prevention and the reporting. And, I've had a career of fighting against hate crimes. So I definitely support that. But we have recently developed 3 approaches that we certainly would like people's comments on. One is we've started, for example, bystander trainings. Nationally, our affiliates have trained over 60,000 people so that if people see an incident, they know how to safely intervene or distract or get people's attention to stop the incident from occurring. Secondly, and obviously, those kinds of community programs are just the tip of the iceberg. We need many housing and mental health programs at the same time. Secondly, we need to build true multi-ethnic unity so that we actually stand in solidarity, so that each of us, all of us, could participate in bystander intervention so that whoever is attacked, we would know what to do. But we need to deepen our multiracial unity. And I'm pleased to say the Asian Pacific Congressional Caucus has taken a lead at doing that. And thirdly, we really need good curriculum in our schools, because Asian Americans are fairly invisible in the schools. There's almost no history or comments on our struggles or contributions in the public schools. So we need to do that, just as there needs to be lesson plans on African Americans, on Latinos, on Native Americans, on Jewish Americans, on Arab Americans, but there has to be good lesson plans on Asian Americans in our public schools.
In terms of safety, when you talk about bystander intervention, for example, are you talking about people taking a kind of law enforcement role, or is there something quite different from that?
Yeah, we're not encouraging people to play in a law enforcement role, but we, for example, in New York, some people say a mentally ill person stomped on an Asian woman who is, I believe, around 65, and he kept on kicking her and stomping on her. And there were 2 or 3 doormen in New York who, instead of helping or yelling or distracting the attacker, just closed the door to the apartment that they work for. And I've talked to the union that these gentlemen work for, and basically they agree that they need bystander training on how to intervene to distract the attackers, to get their attention away. And actually, in that case, there was somebody across the street who started yelling and screaming, and the attacker stopped kicking the woman on the ground. So we're not saying, do something physically, but you can do something that distracts and gets the attention of the attacker in a way that stops the attack. Basically, we're trying to stop the attacks. We're trying to prevent the attacks. And whatever we could do in a safe way, we want to do that.
Congresswoman Chu, what about, if not preventing, at least coping with the history of anti-Asian sentiment. It must be very deep because it has gone on for so long. And here it is now, presumably in part because of what was said about the source of the COVID-19 virus, that triggering a lot of this, but it goes much deeper than that. Why do you think that is?
So there's always been anti-Asian discriminatory feelings in our country. But they got to the boiling point because of President Trump's usage of the terms China virus, Wuhan virus, and Kung flu. He needed somebody to blame because of his failed response to coronavirus. He also needed to get attention away from Russia. So his total focus was on China. And that's despite the fact that the CDC and the World Health Organization said, do not use such terms because it will only stigmatize people who are of that ethnic race or from that country. Instead, Donald Trump doubled down. And as a result, he increases terminology, and his followers also increase that kind of terminology. I think that's why we are at the point that we are at right now. Because he gave permission from the very top to actually blame and scapegoat and even physically harm AAPIs.
Stewart, I talked recently to a woman from Canada who regarded herself as a Taiwanese Canadian. And she said she was astonished when she came to the United States. She's working for one of the local universities here, and she actually has a role in making the university more diverse. But she said she came and she heard in the United States the term Asian Americans, whereas in Canada, it's Chinese Canadian or Japanese Canadian or whatever. I understand there are 40 different languages from people who come from the area we regard as Asia. How do they all get lumped together? Is there some sort of stereotyping? Is that part of the source, do you think, of the hatred that people feel?
Well, there is certainly stereotyping, but the grouping of Asian Americans on the positive end was our decision to unite together because of the similar treatment that we've received. For example, you mentioned the Chinese Exclusion Act, which occurred in 1882. That act, which was supposed to be temporary, was later extended to include all of the Asian groups. So by the 1920s, there was an Asiatic barred zone in our immigration laws, so nobody from Asia could come into the United States. It is true that the violence and some of the overt discrimination tends to be focused on different ethnic groups at one time or another, but in essence, they all end up being treated the same, like the Asiatic barred zone. The discrimination against Asian Americans is very similar. The glass ceiling is very similar. So we have more in common than we have that separate us. So I think the Asian Americans have come together in part because of power and the unity that we can achieve because we've been treated very similarly.
Congresswoman, in Congress, in the Senate or the Congress, what do you have to argue against when you're promoting the legislation that now has passed in the Senate, and you said you have even more coming in the House? What are the arguments against it? What do you have to, get yourself ready to respond to?
We have actually engaged in a mammoth effort to get this bill passed. So believe you me, this was not an easy thing to do. Actually, it all started with our anti-Asian hate crime resolution last fall. It was introduced by Congressmember Grace Meng, and all Democrats voted for it. 14 Republicans did vote for it, but 164 Republicans voted against it. Kevin McCarthy said such things as nobody cares about this. And others were against it because we referred to Trump's usage of the terms China virus, Wuhan virus, and Kung flu. And they didn't want to assign blame to Trump for the usage of these racist terms. So we are still experiencing that now. Actually, that language referring to Trump and his usage of those terms was removed from the Senate bill. And also, Ted Cruz introduced an amendment basically trying to make affirmative action equivalent to a hate crime against Asians. Fortunately, that amendment did not pass. So there are those kinds of feelings on the Republican side. They don't want to get on the wrong side of Trump, for one thing, and others just don't care.
So you don't find a principled opposition to it. It's all political.
Yes, that is right. In fact, I thought it was such a no-brainer. This bill that we put on the floor, it was a resolution actually, this last fall. I was astounded that 164 Republicans voted against it, but it was very ideological for sure.
Stewart Kwoh, how do Asians in general respond to that reality? There are a lot of Asian Americans who vote, and I'm interested in that. There are Asian Republicans too, Asian American Republicans. How do you explain this?
Well, I think that Trump made a calculation that he felt China was an enemy of our country, and he was willing to throw Asian Americans under the bus. We became the collateral damage. He didn't really care about us. He knew that we were being attacked, but he kept on doing it. He kept on using that language, which agitated his base, a right-wing base, to go on the attack mode. So I think it was very purposeful. Asian voters, I think the statistics that we looked at and polled people, about 60 to 65% of Asian Americans voted for President Biden, and less than 30% voted for Trump. Even amongst Chinese American Republicans, a number of prominent groups said, don't vote for Trump, vote for then candidate Biden. So he probably, it's hard to say, but I would estimate he lost at least 10% of his Asian base because of his rhetoric, maybe more, but the Asian community did vote for President Biden because they saw that there was no future in voting for Trump, that he was going to continue his antics in using racism to whip up anger against China or anybody who looked Chinese. Just recently, we were trying to help a school deal with Asian teachers feeling that they were under attack, both by other teachers and by other students. And one student who was not coming to school was called, and the student said his grandparents told him not to be in contact with Asian teachers or students because they were spreading the coronavirus. And this is just a few weeks ago. So what Trump did has long-lasting impacts on our community.
Do you think, Stewart Kwoh, that the idea that Asians are somehow a model minority, that's a phrase that one hears quite often, is really something contrary to the interests of Asian people in the United States, Asian Americans?
Yes, absolutely. The stereotypes of being the model minority or the perpetual foreigner really hurt the Asian community, because there's a lot of Asians who have not made it. Just like in the Jewish community, there's a lot of people who have not made it. So by saying that we're the model minority, it covers up the real needs of the community. There are particular ethnic groups who have a very hard time and actually are more poor than any group. So that kind of stereotype really hurts our community. It also is used as a wedge for other communities, because other communities of color are told, just keep your head down and act like Asians and you'll be okay. Well, that's not true. And so we suffer both as a community, and we're used as a wedge group against other groups by these kinds of stereotypes. So we do, after every census, we do a series of demographic profiles, because we want to show people who we are and where we're at. And so we have nothing to hide by showing what the census is showing. And so we do these profiles. We did about 10 the last go round, and we're planning we're going to do state by state this time around. So people will have the actual information on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders.
Congressman, how are Asian Americans perceived economically by politicians? Are they thought of as a group that is available to be tapped for campaign resources in a big way? Are they thought of as a rich, wealthy community, despite what we just heard? And is that, to some extent, for those who don't get contributions, a cause of resentment?
I think that the model minority stereotype is something that's reflected in our elected leaders. And there are those that, yes, they think that all AAPIs have the campaign money that can be donated to those elected leaders. And in fact, that is exactly why we push so hard to have what we call disaggregated data, data that can actually differentiate between all the different groups amongst AAPIs. For instance, Pacific Islanders have 2 to 3 times the mortality rate of those relative to others in population from COVID-19. Do people know that? No, but it all has to do with health conditions, poverty, and lack of access. We have Southeast Asians who have a high proportion of people who do not complete college, certainly, but even high school. Do people know that in our society, including the elected leaders? I do not think so. So we work a lot to make sure that there is actually a complete picture of the AAPI population, and work to make sure that we overcome these stereotypes that still exist to this day.
I've been looking down at my iPhone because I'm being texted questions from the audience, as I indicated would happen earlier. And so let me turn to some of those now, if I may. Judge Joe asks this: to promote bystander involvement, would it be a good idea to propose immunity for those who intervene in good faith? And Congresswoman, you're the lawmaker. I'll ask you that one first.
Well, what an idea. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I do think that would be kind of hard to implement, because how far of an action do you need to take to actually get immunity? Would it be shouting and screaming from across the street, or would it be actually intervening in a murder? I don't know. But I do think that we need to promote bystander intervention in and of itself without necessarily knowing what the results would be, because I do think people feel helpless. People see what's going on. They want to do something about that. We've seen that in all the vigils and rallies and online programs to stop Asian hate. In fact, I've never seen anything like this in my entire time living, this tremendous outpouring of sentiment by people of all ethnic races to do something about this anti-Asian hate. Well, let me tell you, this bystander intervention is one thing you can do, which could keep you safe, but could definitely stop an anti-Asian hate crime or incident. But not only that, you could actually catch the perpetrator if you did one of those things, which is one of the 5 Ds of this bystander intervention, is documenting. So if you took out your iPhone and simply documented the act, that could play a huge role in catching the perpetrator.
You partially answered a question that comes from Jean, and Stewart Kwoh, I'll put it to you. Jean says a 25-year-old Vietnamese woman I know was yelled at a New York City subway. What can people do in an instance of that kind that would be effective?
Well, there's 2 things. One is the bystander intervention training suggests to people that they can counter those messages on the spot. They can say, that's not right. You shouldn't treat that woman that way. So on the spot, there can be some intervention. But secondly, we want to work with the police to try to give community resources to the police or whomever comes on the scene so that people know where they could get victims assistance. Because people get frightened. In some recent polls, it shows 1/3 of Asian Americans are very fearful for their safety. And so when these incidents occur, many of them are not crimes. So the police or friends can know what are the community resources, like legal aid, like domestic violence, like mental health programs, so that people can get assistance even after the fact. We think that's very important as well. We're working with the LAPD to have them carry around community resource cards. So if they come across a hate incident that doesn't amount to a crime, they don't just say, oh, there's nothing we can do about it and walk away. They can provide the victims with some assistance and some help.
Several people are asking, Stewart, where do you get this kind of intervention training? Is it available online? Do people have it in not in elementary schools, but perhaps in secondary schools? Or do you have to go get it somewhere? Or are there places where, in fact, it's already available?
Well, it is becoming more widespread. Asian Americans Advancing Justice in DC, in Chicago, in San Francisco and Atlanta, and also in Los Angeles are now introducing these programs for 500 people, for 1,000 people. The program in Los Angeles, where I'm from, is introducing like 3 programs every month. So people could just look up Asian Americans Advancing Justice and find these programs, but they are proliferating. I spoke to a union this week, and we may do some specialized trainings for their members as well, because we think it's an effective tool. So they could contact Asian Americans Advancing Justice or email us, and we could provide information on where they could get that training.
And Judy Chu, our Congresswoman, is there an effort, or is it part of your bills or other legislation to provide federal support for the kind of thing that Stewart Kwoh is talking about and circulating?
Well, we certainly would want to provide support for such things, for ways for victims to be able to get the resources that they need, but also for preventive measures such as this. So absolutely, we want to look into how we can support it on a federal level.
So do you have any specific provisions, or could you put a figure in terms of the amount of money that might be needed in order to be more effective? Or is that one of those things that you just have to wait until you can see what you can get?
Well, I think that supporting groups like Asian Americans Advancing Justice and all the things that they do, including bystander intervention training, would be one way of making sure that it continues. So it wouldn't, I think, have to be a specific allocation just for bystander intervention training. I do think that it's important for us to support the different organizations that are doing the tremendous work that will protect people, that will make sure that victims get the resources that they need, and that that we can and doing the things that will can ensure that people have a more well-rounded and unstereotypical way of looking at Asian Americans.
Stewart Kwoh, what about college admissions? It is, you hear it both ways. You hear that, in fact, there are Asian Americans are so good at passing the tests that they are in select universities in larger numbers than they have a right to be given their share of the population. There are others who say, no, that's not right, that in fact, there's a revolt against them amongst admissions officers just because of that contention. Where does it stand, as far as you know, with regard to college admissions?
Well, we're for affirmative action. We think that affirmative action, of course, it should be properly implemented. There should be no discrimination. But we think giving people a second look who have faced discrimination, who have faced extreme hardship, is something that benefits our society. And whether it's race-conscious admissions or class-conscious admissions, we think that many societies around the globe have those programs because we want everybody to have an equal chance. We're not talking about a quota system. We're talking about giving people who have faced hardship or discrimination a second look. We're not for quotas, but we think that that second look is important for our society so that we can have a more equal society, a fair society, and we just believe that that's important. We also think that Asian Americans shouldn't be scared by the talk of quotas. We don't believe in quotas. They're illegal. But to understand what African Americans or Latinos or Native Americans are going through is very important to build that unity and solidarity, especially at this moment when Asian Americans are being attacked. Asian Americans need to also understand that other people are being attacked as well, like Jewish Americans are being attacked left and right. And there's a very high level of anti-Semitism occurring in our country right now. We need to stand by Jewish Americans as well. I remember when Joseph Aledo, whose brother was gunned down by white supremacists in Los Angeles in 1999, his brother was shot and killed, a Filipino postal worker. And there were 5 Jewish children who were shot by the same white supremacists that morning. And at the memorial services, I remember Ishmael, the brother of Joseph, turned to the Jewish leaders and the Jewish parents and said, if we can do anything to support you, we'll do that. That kind of solidarity is irreplaceable. We have to be standing with each other at these crucial moments.
Congresswoman, are you seeing that in the House of Representatives? Once again, the Senate passed, there was only 1 vote against the COVID-19 hate bill. Do you see that kind of support in the Congress? And are you looking forward to near unanimity, excuse me, when the votes are ultimately taken?
I'm actually not sure what to expect because I still have some PTSD from that previous vote on the anti-Asian hate crimes resolution. So I am not sure. I do know we will have the votes to pass it out because of the Democratic majority. But I am still a little bit cautious. I do think, though, that since it did pass with an overwhelming vote of the Republicans in the Senate, that the Republicans in the House might follow suit. I also think that they would look very, very bad voting against this, considering all that has happened, especially in recent months.
But that's not necessarily an argument you can make. Is it because you have to suggest that if people vote against it, they're in fact being racist?
Well, I mean, it certainly would be the implications. Look at what has happened in the last few months. I mean, we have had this happen over the whole year, but in the last few months, we had more elderly and vulnerable Asian Americans being pushed, shoved, killed. An 84-year-old Thai man in San Francisco was assaulted and killed. A 69-year-old Filipino man in a New York subway had a box cutter slashed over his face, requiring 100 stitches from ear to ear. And in my district, there was a man sitting at a bus stop, and he was beaten with his own cane, causing him to lose part of his finger. And of course, then there's the most horrific one of all, the fact that there was a shooter who went to 3 Asian spas, one right after the other, shooting in them with great certainty that the persons who would be killed would be Asian women. And as a result, 8 people died and 6 of them were Asian women. So after all that, to think that some Congress member could not vote for this bill, which would improve things to a great degree, I think they should be ashamed of themselves.
Stewart Kwoh, we just have a couple of minutes left, and of course, people are interested in going to the to watch the president address the Congress. Any last words that you would like to tell our audience? Anything? Are you hopeful?
Yes, I think that the violence, the 4,000 cases against Asian Americans, the upsurge and the identification of violence against different people of color, against different religious groups like Jewish Americans, is raising a consciousness in the country so that, for example, ethnic studies is more popular than ever before. I'm working with the California State Superintendent, the County Education Department, and the LA Unified School District. They all are very interested in bringing in ethnic studies, and in particular, they're interested in Asian American ethnic studies. So I am hopeful that our new program called Asian American Education Project, you could look it up on our new website, asianamericanedu.org, and Judy is on our advisory board, can be given out to the country. And our goal over the next few years is to reach 1 million young people of all different backgrounds throughout America to learn about the history, the struggles, and the contributions of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. We think, I'm very optimistic that we could get that done. And we just released our free teacher trainings April 18th. And within a week, we had 500 teachers sign up. So I am optimistic and hopeful that people will do something about this horrible situation where, because of the way people look or the way they practice their religion, they're being attacked by other Americans. And that simply has to stop. So I'm hopeful that we could change that.
Congresswoman, they have limitations on debate in Congress sometimes. We have a minute left.
Well, let me say we're about to go to the State of the Union. Normally, I'd be there with one guest, which is what we're allowed. My guest tonight, I have a virtual guest. He's the son of one of the 6 Asian women that was murdered in Georgia. Yesterday, he told me his story. He told me about what she was like, how she loved Korean food, karaoke, how he went to look for her the day of the shooting and she was not there. And how she loved him so much and made sure he went to college. I'm telling you this just because I want you to know these are human beings that are being touched, whose lives are being traumatized. These are people that we need to care about, whose lives will be forever changed. But let me also say that the response by the public to all that's going on has been so incredible. We called for a National Day of Action and Healing, and we got 1.1 billion interactions online in response to this. President Biden called us into the Oval Office, us API members of Congress, to talk about further actions that he wants to take on Asian hate crimes. And everywhere I see people of all different ethnic races coming together to have some kind of stop AAPI hate rally. So let me say that's the most powerful thing you could do, to come out, to speak, to be together across different ethnic races, to come together and say, we must stop Asian hate. We must make sure everybody is included in this country and that America stands as a country for all.
Very moving to hear your stories, both of you, and very inspiring as well to hear what you have to say. I want to thank you both. The Honorable Judy Chu, Congresswoman from California, Stewart Kwoh, thank you very much for being with us. Let me tell our audience that next week it's Al Franken. The subject is a former senator's view of Washington with a side of wit. The interrogator, if that's the right term, will be Madeline Brand, a colleague of mine. Meantime, thanks to all of you for watching America at a Crossroads. Thanks very much for being with us.